for a long story today, but it's an important story, and maybe actually one that you know. So last week, Jesus was seen with some very unseemly people. And the religious authorities didn't like it, and they said, look, he must not be a good guy. Look who he's hanging out with. And Jesus told these stories to confront them. He said, well, actually, this is what God is like. He says, God is like a shepherd who had 100 sheep, and one went away and was lost, and then the shepherd searched and found the sheep, and picked it up and draped it over his shoulders and comforted it, and loved it, and brought it home. And not only that, but in bringing it home, he invited all of his friends, and they celebrated. They had a party together. And he said, oh, if that doesn't give you the point, God is also like a woman who has these 10 coins, and she loses one of her coins, and she's desperately, breathlessly searching for the coin, sweeping her house. She doesn't wait till morning when there's more natural light. She lights a lamp, she sweeps the house, she finds the coin, and she holds it close. It's precious to her. And she, for that coin, throws a party. We talked about last week, that's what God is like. We borrowed these words from Pastor Rich Velotis up in New York City. The story of the Bible, the story of Jesus, the story of who God is, has 5 rhythms. There were 4 that Rich Velotis said, and we added one together. The first one is, I love you. The second is, I'm with you. The third is, don't be afraid. And the fourth is, you can come home. And we added as a community, let's party. That God is a celebrating God. That God, in the transformation of people's lives and reconciling of relationships and finding us where we are, not expecting us to be a certain way, but just as we are, finds us, loves us, and celebrates us. But Jesus wasn't done. And so he tells this story that many of you may know. That's often called the prodigal son, or the story of a man with 2 sons. And it's in Luke 15, starting in verse 11. So we're going to hear this story together today. Jesus said, a certain man had 2 sons. The younger son said to his father, Father, give me my share of the inheritance. Then the father divided his estate between them. And soon afterward, the younger son gathered everything together, took a trip to a land far away. There he wasted his wealth through extravagant living. When he used up his resources, a severe food shortage arose in the country, and he began to be in need. And he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. He longed to eat his fill from what the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, but I'm starving to death? I will get up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Take me as one of your hired hands. So he got up and went to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. His father ran to him, hugged him, and kissed him. Then his son said, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Fetch the fattened calf and slaughter it. We must celebrate with feasting. Because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field. Coming in from the field, he approached the house and heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what was going on. And the servant replied, your brother has arrived, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf, because he received his son back safe and sound. Then the older son was furious and didn't want to enter in, but his father came out and begged him. He answered his father, look, I've served you all these years. I never disobeyed your instructions. Yet you've never given me as much as a young goat, so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours returned, after gobbling up your estate on prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him. Then his father said, Son, you're always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. Friends, this is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. I've shared this before, and it bears repeating, I guess, if some of you don't know me that well, that I'm a twin. When I share about most interesting facts about myself, that's usually the one I use. I've shared that before. And people always say, what's it like being a twin? I don't know what to compare it to. I've only ever been one. And being a twin, of course, has had an impact on my life. I've shared birthdays and shared birthday parties most of my life. We shared a room together for a long, long time. But one thing I didn't realize until later in my life was, being a twin is important to me. I didn't realize the impact it had on my older sister, Caitlin. And she's 5 years older than us. And when my mom took Caitlin to the doctor, my mom was getting an ultrasound because she was pregnant again. And the doctor made what he thought was a funny joke, but ended up not being a very funny joke, was doing ultrasound and said, I just want to make sure there's not 3 in there. And my mom said, very funny. And he said, no, just 2. And this was the first time she was hearing this. And she said, there's 2 babies in there? And he said, yeah, there's 2 babies. And my older sister started hopping up and down, clapping, 2 babies, 2 babies, 2 babies. And my mom was like weeping, 2 babies, 2 babies. What am I going to do, 2 babies? Because Caitlin had it like a perfect life. She had everything going for her. They had a really good situation. Mom, Dad, Caitlin. She got all the attention. When she had a birthday, she got all the attention. She was an only child. It was wonderful, wonderful for her. And to have another kid come into the picture would be one thing. It would be enough if it had been just one. But it was 2 of us, and we were mischievous, and we were a hard time. And to our credit, she also would pick one of us to pit against the other one. She had a lot of fun with us, but it, frankly, at that moment, ruined her life. There's this really cute picture that my mom still has. My dad's a photographer, and so he took this picture of us, and it's my older sister, Caitlin. She's probably 5 or 6, holding me and my sister, Jillian, in her lap. And she's smiling, and we're like, we're barely there. And it's a really, really cute picture, but my dad says after that picture was taken, she shrieked, "Get these babies off of me." And so they took us off, and my parents said that one time that she went in our room and was looking in our cribs, and she was like, they don't do anything. We really ruined her life. And I think the greatest grace that God has given me in my entire life, for many, many reasons, but also particularly for this reason, is to be married to my wife, Landon. Because she has 2 sisters who are twins. And I know you're thinking, we've asked and asked, it skips a generation. We're worried about it too. But that's not what this morning is about. She is about 3 or 4 years older than her younger sisters. They're twins, and the same thing happened to her. Had a really good thing going. It was just her, living her best life, and then Bailey and Madison came along, her 2 sisters, ruined her life in some way. There's this really great home video that her uncle was taking, and he's trying to ask her all these questions, and Landon is the sweetest, cutest kid. She's really, really shy. She's kind of whispering the answers, how old she is, and all this stuff. And he says, "What are your sisters' names?" And she amps up a little. She goes, "Bailey and Madison." Her mom says that sometimes she'd be changing the twins' diapers, and she'd just be overcome with this feeling that she was being watched. And she's look, and Landon was glaring through the door, how could you do this to me? But I've learned a lot. Caitlin and I get along great. My older sister and I get along great now. We talk, and she made me an uncle, which I'm really proud of. Her son, Hudson, was my first nephew. I get to be fun Uncle Colin, and I don't get to see her as often. Both she and my other sister live on the East Coast, and I'm just really proud to be her brother. But there for a while, I think she would say the same thing. We didn't understand each other. And then I married Landon, and I feel like I understand her more. And really empathize with her and really understand, maybe, she had this good thing going, and then me and my sister came along and it kind of messed it all up. And things are good now, but you've been there too, I think. Not maybe a sibling, though maybe that's the case for you, or you get a new neighbor or a new coworker or something, and you see this person as an interruption. That this person just comes into your life, or these people come into your life, and you didn't expect it, and you certainly didn't ask for it, and now they're there and you have to deal with them. That's how Landon felt about her new sisters, and that's how my sister felt about me and my sister in that time, that it just is an interruption. Will Willimon is a bishop in the Methodist Church, and he says ministry is a series of difficult conversations, which I've come to believe is true. And I might add a caveat to that, or say another version of that is ministry is also just a series of interruptions, if we let it happen. If we cultivate the environment, we open ourselves to be interrupted by people. And that's what the story is about today. If we focus in particular on the older brother, an interruption. Okay, this relationship had been broken. They weren't reconciled. He took his inheritance, what was owed to him, and he left. And then he just gets to come back. And not just gets to come back and maybe be on a probationary period or something. They have a party for him. His dad celebrates him. He gives him a ring, and they kill the fattened calf, and they have this big feast, and they celebrate him. It's an interruption. You can hear in the older son's voice, even just in the text, like, how could you do this? Like, I did everything right. I showed up when I was supposed to. I stayed here when I was supposed to. I worked with you. And then this guy comes back. He interrupts us. Lee Critcher is a pastor now. He was a pastor back in the 70s and 80s, and he planted this church, and it grew like crazy. And after it grew like crazy, he kind of had a succession plan, and he handed it off to somebody else, and he became an executive at Home Depot. And he worked at Home Depot for a really, really long time. And then the church called the one that he had planted, and they're like, hey, Lee, how's it going? He's like, oh, things are great. How about you? Not so well. This church that he had grown and built and made huge and beautiful, that God had done so many amazing things in, and all these people were coming to it, was falling apart. It was in deep, steep decline. And so they said, would you come back? This pastor that had planted this church and had left, and maybe for good reason, they wanted him to come back. And he said no the first time. And he talked to his friend Andy Stanley, who's another pastor in that area, and Andy encouraged him to do it. He said, you should do it. And he went back, and he saw all the things that he had started, and all these things he had implemented, and just stayed around, and nothing had really changed or innovated. There was no new way to connect with new people. A lot of the same people that were there when he was there were still there, but no new people. And he said, I didn't see a stranger in the building. And they weren't reaching people. In this populous area where all these people were moving, they just weren't reaching people. And so he started to change things. And they started to change the music, and they started to update the environments and do all of this other stuff. And this woman came to him one time just furious and said, you've interrupted everything. And he says it remembers it as this like sad moment in the life of his ministry, that he knew this woman and he loved her, and he thought she loved him, and he came in to change all this stuff, and she wasn't happy. That relationship was broken, interrupted. Just like last week. Just like how we saw in the story of the lost coin and the lost sheep, those stories aren't about us. They're not about, categorizing, are we lost or are we found? Are we the good sheep that stayed in the fold, or are we the wandering sheep that did some bad stuff? Are we the coin that fell off the chain of coins, or are we the coins that stayed? It's not about categorization. It's about who God is. It's about God's character. It's about God's disposition toward humanity in general. How does God feel about you? And those stories tell us that Jesus thinks that God thinks you are precious, that you are worth searching for, that you are worth loving, that you are worth pursuing, that you are worth finding. And again, in this longer story, he emphasizes that point because we see in the story the central figure is the Father. The figure that shocks us the most is not the two sons. We understand, we empathize with their reactions to these things that happen in their lives, but we don't totally understand the Father. I'm most moved by this picture of the father whose son has taken his money, and we get this internal dialogue with the son. And it's hard to tell when reading the story. Is he coming back for more? Is he really regretful? Does he really have any remorse for what he's done? Because he has this internal dialogue where he says to himself, essentially, my dad was really generous. I could go back. I could find him again. I could see if maybe he could help me. He says, how many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, but I'm starving to death? Meaning pig food. My dad has better than pig food. I could go meet one of my dad's servants. So he decides to go back. He has this thought. When he came to his senses, he said, I will get up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. He's rehearsing what he's going to say. It could be insincere. But then when he goes back home, we have this beautiful picture of the father seeing his son a long way off. And he doesn't cross his arms like, okay, he's back again. He sees him a long way off, and he tells his servants, find the fattened calf, my son has returned home. And we know in the first century, they were wearing this long kind of dress-like garb, that he would have made a fool of himself, lifting it up to run out to meet his son and hug him, embrace him, and kiss him. My friend Adam's church is called Embrace from this very story. He said, I want our church to be like that, to be like the man who looked out on the horizon and saw his son, and he didn't wait for him to come back. He didn't try to entice him. He didn't judge him. He didn't ask, where have you been? He ran out to meet him, and he embraced him and kissed him and threw him a party, celebrated. And maybe if the younger son was insincere in his transformation, maybe he was. I don't know. It's hard to tell just from reading the text. If we guess that he was, that reaction, the way his dad received him, transformed his life. Changed who he was. He expected his dad to beat up on him, to judge him, to wonder where he was, to question him, how he spent all the money, and he hugged him instead. And likewise for the older son. The older son is upset, and the father says to the older son the same thing. Everything I have is yours. You're still my son. I'm glad that you stayed around. And he embraces him, and that changes him too. He goes to meet his older son and his younger son where they are, in their attitude, in their physical space, wherever they are, and he goes out to meet them, to embrace them, not to push them away, not to categorize them, not to make a lot out of all the little things that they had done, although he doesn't keep a list and count their sins. He embraces them and loves them. One of my professors in seminary gave us all one of those paper IKEA rulers. And he says, everybody has this 3 feet around them. And you kind of have us measure it out. It's a metaphor. It's not actually 3 feet. And I'm an introvert, so it's always kind of if someone's getting close to the end of the 3 feet, it's back up a little bit. And then people always ask me, you're an introvert, does that mean you don't like people? I'm like, no, just you. So step back a little bit. This is my 3 feet, and it's not really that I love people. Of course, the profession I've chosen, I have to love people, and I get to love people, and I love people, but I value my own time. But we have this 3 feet around us, and sometimes we do that. People get close to it, I got to take a couple of steps back because they're going to interrupt me. I have this good thing going on. Like the older son, my brother went away, he wasted it all, and he came back into the circle, and we let him come back in. That's the 3 feet around you. Or you're an only child, and then you now all of a sudden have 2 siblings. They're in your circle, you're interrupted, and you have to deal with them. You're a father, and you've given so much to your children, you've given so much to the people that you love, and they've squandered it, and then they come back into your circle and maybe ask for more. Somebody that you've broken a relationship with comes back to maybe make it right, and they interrupt what's going on. You've forgotten about them, or thought that they were long gone. And this 3 feet around us. I think what this story teaches us, the practical implication for us following Jesus, and I think for branches, what I want to be at the heartbeat of who we are, is when we have this 3 feet around us, and at the edge of it we see someone, we step in. We close the gap. Not in an annoying, obnoxious way, but get closer. We lean in. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says, only love gets close enough to know. We get close. We make our circle interact with others. We see people far off on the edge, and we don't say, well, let's see if they're going to show up or not. Let's put up a sign. Welcome home, son. No, what God shows us, what Jesus shows us in the story is you run, you make a fool of yourself. You make every effort to embrace the person back into your circle. You have this 3 feet around you, say, I want my 3 feet around me to intersect with your 3 feet. I want the people that maybe have hurt me and harmed me in some way, and not in an abusive way, but people with these relationships that need to be reconciled, I want them to come back in. I want my life to be transformed by my extravagance, my recklessness, as we sang today. It's what the word prodigal means. I want to shower on other people the love that they don't deserve because I don't deserve it. I want to invite people into this circle, into this place. I want to run out to people and bring them in, not to make myself look better, or not to prop up some organization, or to have more people in a room, but because we know that as we enter the 3 feet around Jesus, our lives change. And we know that the story of the gospel is that God took that 3 feet around himself, put on flesh, became a person, and intersected with all of our lives. Paul tells us in the New Testament, Jesus bore everything, every temptation, anything what we would ever face in his own body. He took it all on himself, willfully, willingly, said, I want to encounter every temptation that every person could possibly encounter. He took on flesh to do just that. He walked alongside us. This promise all the way back in the Old Testament, in Leviticus, that God says, I will be your God and you will be my people. And he answered that prayer by becoming a baby. Talk about interruption. Interrupted the world in the most foolish, reckless way possible to become a helpless child so that his 3 feet could intersect with ours. I think it's a risk willing to take. It's the charge that I have as a pastor, as the leader of this new community. It's the charge that Carrie has in leading us in worship, is that God's space around himself would interact, would collide with ours. And likewise, then we would be pushed, we would be compelled, that then our space, the 3 feet around us, the 3 feet around branches, the 3 feet around what it means to be a Christian, would interact with the world. That's the invitation. That pastor, Lee Critcher, his 3 feet interacted with this woman's 3 feet who was so angry at him for changing the carpet or changing the style of music or whatever else, all these other things that he maybe shouldn't have done so quickly. And their relationship transformed, was reconciled, when he said to her, hey, if I remember correctly, your son used to go here, used to be part of this community. What happened? And she told him the story, and they got together closer. They shared a little bit of their stories, and it reconciled them some. And she said he got tired of all the stuff that the church was doing. And he said, there's no silver bullet. There's no quick fix. But, hypothetically, if any of this stuff changing meant that you could sit with your son at church on Sunday, would you be okay with it then? And she said, of course, yes. And he says in the book that he wrote about this whole experience that she does. And her son did come back. And she wears those big headphones we put on babies at concerts because they changed the music and she don't like it. But she worships with her son in worship every week. Because their circles interacted, and she risked, and she was reckless, and she was extravagant in sharing a little bit of who she was and let go of her preferences so that circle could grow wider and connect with more people. Somebody, at some point, the reason that you're here today, maybe it was as early as yesterday or this morning, ran out to meet you and said, would you come to this thing today? Or maybe a long, long time ago, somebody ran out to meet you and said, hey, have you heard about this Jesus person? He's changed my life. Someone ran out to meet you. I was driving in the car yesterday and just thinking, listing all the people in my life who ran out to meet me where I was. And didn't say, where have you been? Didn't question where I was at the time. Didn't want an invoice for all the things I spent my money and resources on. They embraced me. They showed me how God loves, what God is like, who Jesus embodied. Their circle touched mine. They ran out to meet me. We have 3 weeks before we launch Branches together. I wish we could do it again and again and again for the next few weeks, but on September 18th, we're going to throw a party. Because we believe that God is celebrating the transformation of people's lives. And when He is lifted up, drawing all of those people to Himself, He sees all of them on the horizon. And I want to say to you this morning, God sees you on the horizon. He doesn't say, oh no, here comes so-and-so. God runs out to meet you. He's doing it even now. He's embracing you even now. And He's inviting you on behalf of Him to go into the world and look on your margins. Look on the people on the edges of your life. Look at the people that maybe you think are a lost cause and run out to meet them. And invite them in. And maybe you don't invite them to Branches. That would be wonderful if you did. But it's not about that. Invite them in to your heart. Invite them into your relationship. Invite them into the experience that you've had of God in Jesus. Invite them. Run out to meet them and embrace them. It's all simple. It's so simple. I think we so overcomplicate it sometimes. And Jesus shows us it's this simple. Run out to meet them. Open yourself for interruption. Interrupt others in a helpful, kind, gentle Christian way. It's what Dallas Willard calls the allure of gentleness. Go out to meet them. That's the charge. Let's do it together.